Welcome back, friends. And as we always like to do, we start off with an update on what's going on MGO Blue Podcast. Already out, the recap of the Michigan-Miami game that's on Defend the Block from Monday night. Big win for Michigan. Still to come, Conquering Heroes, another member of the Hall of Honor. He's going to join me on Thursday, and that's the men's tennis inductee, Dan Goldberg. Plus, we'll have In the Trenches on Thursday, the preview for Northwestern, as well as on Saturday, the post-game recap, and it will be a Michigan win over Northwestern. Put that one in the books, but at this point, I want to bring in, as we already talked about Defend the Block, you can hear his voice on all the Michigan broadcasts when it's the Michigan basketball team, the voice of Michigan basketball, Mr. Brian Boesch. How you doing, Brian?
I'm great. Wolverines 3-1. Solid performance. Obviously got to clean up the turnovers, which we talked plenty about on that post-game edition of Defend the Block. But, hey, it's a busy time. It's a fun time, and we're ready to rock and roll. So let's get going on the football side with our 7 from 77. And John, of course, we all know that the biggest one of the season comes up a week from Saturday, Michigan heading down south. But getting to 6 wins to get to bowl eligibility, it feels important, both for the here and now and for the future. It isn't the same type of must-win feel we've had in games for Michigan over the last 3 years, but it feels like there should be some urgency around the program, and that's the vibe that I got, but you have to actually go out and do it over the course of the week. What do you think about this in terms of the importance of Michigan versus Northwestern?
Well, it is all about getting that bowl win or that bowl opportunity. It's the extra practices. It's the exposure. We have no idea with the makeup of college football right now and the postseason makeup where that bowl game is going to be. I mean, it could be anywhere north to south, east to west. There's a lot of options, and it depends on how many teams are in the college football playoffs from the Big Ten, and everything will get seeded from there. But, it's mainly about the practices, the extra practices that you're going to get. And Sharon talked about it on Inside Michigan Football Tuesday night or tonight when it comes out. I'll give you a little preview. It's the ability to see what you're going to have next year. It's the preview of some of these young players that are going to get a chance to get more reps. It's the incoming freshman class, as Michigan has done in the past couple of years, that are early enrollees. When they're on campus, they can be a part of practice. So, and it's not that they're going to be an impact in the game or impact at practice, but they learn what it takes to practice, how to prepare, how to get ready for practice, what practice looks like, feels like, how you should perform at practice, all of those different things. The sooner that they can get on board with those things gives them a step up into spring ball, gives them a step up into fall camp, everything that is to come. So it's really about, and we all know that there's going to be guys, and who knows who plays, who doesn't play, who comes back, who's not coming back. All of those decisions will be made after the season, but there are going to be opportunities for young players, the up and coming guys, some of them who we've talked about that are starting to get time in these games will get even more time in the bowl game.
Yeah, reality is, if it's a non-playoff bowl game, it's kind of just an unofficial start to the next season in terms of the names you'll see. There will be opt-outs, all of that, but you got to get there, and Michigan's 1 win away. Now, number 2 on our 7 from 77, it's got to be tough to completely focus on Northwestern with Ohio State looming next week. Now, it may have helped the fact that this past week was a bye week, so maybe there was some of that looking around Northwestern to Ohio State internally. But with the fact that, there isn't much to play for beyond beating Ohio State and getting bowl eligibility this season, is there some of that human nature difficulty of ensuring that you are locking in on Northwestern this week? What do you remember from your experiences?
Well, I mean, so this year's a little bit different, and just in terms of how the schedule sets up, they had a bye week. So there was plenty of time to look at Northwestern, plenty of time to look ahead, as you would in the first bye week, to the opponents that were coming. The first bye week, you were coming out of it playing against Illinois, but you had time to look at Oregon. You had time to look at Michigan State. You had time to look at different teams along the path and do a little bit of extra film study, whether it's individual, and a lot of it will be individual, versus with your coaches or out at practice. But the other thing is, and Jim Harbaugh instituted this a while ago, it's the Ohio State drills, the ones that are already integrated into practice. And it doesn't matter if it's week 1, week 8, week 10, those are already a part of practice. So if you are preparing to play against one of the best teams in the Big Ten, which Ohio State still is, then you are in fact still preparing for whoever that opponent is that you're playing. Now, the schemes, the names, the numbers, all of those things may be a little bit different, but if you can prepare to beat one of the best teams, you are in fact preparing for every team in the Big Ten.
Yeah, it's a great point. Now, the players, they got to lock it on Northwestern. We get a chance to look ahead a little bit. And we get a chance this weekend to kind of put into perspective what we see from Michigan and gauge how that can be interpreted looking ahead to Ohio State a week from Saturday. So this weekend, what are you looking for from the Michigan offense in the context of, okay, what of that can you pack up, take it down south, and utilize against the Buckeyes?
Well, you got to be able to control the line of scrimmage. You've got to be able to run the football and protect the quarterback. The entire offense starts and ends, obviously, with the center quarterback exchange. And always, as we're going to hear from Davis, he's going to talk about when the play actually begins. He's going to join us a little bit later in the program on the audio side. But you've got to be able to win up front. And where Michigan has struggled is with movement up front. Inexperienced offensive line, still learning to play together, still trying to gel as a unit. You've got to be able to trust your technique. And I've said it time and time again. And until that happens, they're going to struggle with defensive linemen moving up front, snap of the ball, shift, motion, slants, angles, all of those different things. And then it's, once you conquer that, it's the run through linebackers. And we heard from Sharon Moore after the Oregon game, after the Indiana game. You've got to be able to recognize that. And you can't wait to the fourth quarter to say, oh, they're running through. Like, it happens early in the game. So you've got to be able to identify those things and block them up front, because those are the things that Ohio State is going to do. They've got a very good coaching staff. They're going to look and say, what has Michigan struggled with? Oh, movement up front. Oh, okay, well, let's move our guys up front. What else have they struggled with? Run through linebackers. Well, let's pair those two together. Now, all of a sudden, you've got to be able to get back to the basics. As we've heard from players, we've heard from coaches this week, those are the basics of football. It's being able to block the down lineman first, and then continuing up to the linebackers. And sometimes those are run through linebackers. You got to identify them, show up, and if you can at least let the running backs get to the line of scrimmage before they got to make their first cut, now you've got an advantage. If you can allow Davis Warren to be able to go through his progressions, yeah, there are times he's going to have to step up. He can move around the pocket. It doesn't have to be an undisturbed pocket, but he's got to be able to step up. He's got to be able to move around and do things that he does naturally and feel naturally doing to deliver the football downfield. That's where it all starts. And until that happens, this offense will struggle.
Yeah, heading into game 11, it's no time better than the present to bounce back, to figure it out, and to finish strongly. Now, the defense has been ascending in recent weeks as we get into number 4 on our 7 from 77. Things you'll be keeping your eye on this week against a Northwestern team that just doesn't have a whole lot offensively in and of itself that Michigan can use against one of the best offenses in the country a week from then.
Well, one of the things they do have is a mobile quarterback. They've got a dual threat quarterback that can make plays with his feet. He can make plays with his arm. Now, he may not have a lot of weapons around him, but he's a guy that is very dangerous anytime he's on the field. So what Michigan needs to be able to do is, there are times, you're going to go man coverage. It's a part of what Wink Martindale's defense is built on. Other times where you're going to be in zone so that you have eyes on the quarterback. If he escapes the pocket, not everybody's back is turned. And there's different combinations that you can have on either side of the field, near and far. But, I think the biggest thing, and one of the things that we heard from Sharon after the Indiana game, was the ability to apply pressure on their quarterback by only rushing 4. And it's been something I've been talking about all season long. When you have players up front with the talent that Michigan has, you've got to be able to win one-on-one matchups. And on every play, there's going to be somebody up front, probably 2 guys at a minimum, that are going to be in a one-on-one matchup. Those have to be wins for Michigan. And if you can win those and put pressure with 4, now all of a sudden you can drop 7 into coverage, and you could do any combination that you want. And it gives you some freedom to be able to take some risks in the secondary, try and create some turnovers, try and create, just a dysfunctional look for the quarterback. That's what you're trying to do, and create doubt in his mind, make him slow things down, make him be a runner. Because if you're disciplined in your rush lanes and you're winning those one-on-one matchups, it shouldn't matter how mobile he is. You should be in position to make plays. But I think that's been the biggest difference in the last couple of weeks, where Michigan has been able to get pressure with 4. And then you throw in there the fact that you've got 2 very mobile sideline-to-sideline linebackers in Jay Sean Barnum and Ernest Hausman. Both of those guys can play downhill. They can play coverage. We saw Ernie do it in the Washington game with the interception. He's been very good at tackling, tight ends and running backs in open field and covering, slot receivers when required to do so. And that really is, when you have a secondary that is depleted with injury, and I don't know if Will Johnson's going to be back or not. Sharon really hasn't tipped his hand to that. When that's the case, you've got to be really good in those front 6, front 7.
All right, before we continue our 7 from 77, let's tell our listeners about our friends at Meijer, the presenting sponsor of In the Trenches, the 2024 Michigan football season, and hundreds of teams across the Midwest.
Yeah, Brian, we've been talking about how much we love Meijer, and whenever you shop Meijer, you shop for your entire community. You help support food rescue programs and Simply Give. You help keep your neighbors well with vaccinations, free prescriptions, and mobile medicine. You help support sustainability in all our communities for today, tomorrow, and years to come. And you help empower minority-owned businesses. Whenever you shop Meijer, you help people in your community to work, to play, to live, and to learn. You can learn more at MeijerCommunity.com. Meijer is a proud supporter and fan of the 2024 Michigan football season.
Number 5 on our 7 from 77. Before we dig into Ohio State and Indiana, got to get your thoughts on certainly what was a lot closer than people anticipated. Goes to show you, when you go down the stretch in a college football season and you go to a hostile environment, you're not just, it's not a birthright for a team that's expected to win to go there and get the job done. Number 1 Oregon was down in Madison 13-6 after 3. Ducks end up surviving, winning 16-13. Badgers respond by firing their offensive coordinator. Your reaction to really the Oregon's first test in a game that they weren't expected to be tested?
Well, I mean, it kind of shows you how patient that Oregon team is and how patient they're willing to be. Because again, it was, you look at the numbers for Dylan Gabriel. It was, 22 of 31, 218 yards, nothing that knocks your sock off, but nothing bads either. But you look at that one interception and how costly that one turnover was. And then you still have Jordan James as a 100-yard rusher. You're able to rush for well over 100 yards. But when you dink and dunk against a team like Wisconsin, they're very good at being patient as well defensively. That's one thing that, no matter who the coaching staff has been there, no matter what style offense they've been playing defensively, they've been very solid and they've been very sound. And so they don't give up the big play. And Oregon really, they're not a team that's looking to go over the top a lot. When they do, they do have that capability. They still had a 32-yard reception to Stewart. Terrence Ferguson had a 25-yard catch. So they still have that ability, but they're just a very patient team. They're not going to take a lot of chances. They're not going to put the football at risk. So that's how you end up with a 16-13 score against a team like Wisconsin that loves to possess the football. Even though they're trying to go air raid, they threw the ball 28 times. There's only 12 completions by their quarterback, and they could say whatever they want and try and blame whoever they want. They're not playing with their starting quarterback that they started the season with. He's out. They're still, as a program, not where they were 5 or 6 years ago. They're still trying to build things up there as Luke Fickell does what he can to try and turn over the roster there. But they're still a very disciplined, hard-nosed, physical team. And, Oregon did what they had to do to win that game. And that's when you're the number 1 team in the country, you're going to get everyone's best shot. That was Wisconsin's absolute best shot, and they just came up a little bit short.
Yeah, fun game. Grind it out. That was Big Ten style, and credit Oregon for getting the job done, even if it wasn't necessarily pretty in November. You'll take it. All right. Ohio State takes care of business, quote, on the road at Northwestern at Wrigley Field. There was plenty of scarlet and gray at Wrigley in that one. Indiana won the bye week because they signed Curt Cignetti to an extension. It's noon Saturday, Buckeyes and Hoosiers. I'm sure the schedule makers, when they were looking at the game before the game for the Wolverines and the Buckeyes, all right, yeah, Indiana for Ohio State, Northwestern for Michigan, and it'll be nice, easy peasy. And you got a top 5 matchup that really dictates a lot in the Big Ten and the national conversation. How do you look at this game, this matchup, both in terms of the national aspect, but also in terms of the Michigan awaiting Ohio State angle?
Well, so I'll take the Ohio State angle in just a moment. But when you look at Ohio State's schedule, obviously they started the year with 3 easy wins against non-Big Ten opponents. Once they got into the Big Ten and they started facing some teams like Iowa and Nebraska, and they were going through the gauntlet. Obviously, we all watched the Penn State game. At halftime, the final score doesn't necessarily it's not necessarily a good indicator of the struggles that they've had. They haven't been as dynamic an offense as they thought they would be. Defensively, they've been pretty good, but there haven't been as many turnovers. There haven't been as many opportunities to give the ball back to the offense. And so I'm really curious in this game. I have no doubt that Kirk Sidnetti will have this team ready to play in Columbus. There's no question about it. Will they be able to match up through 4 quarters with the speed and the talent that Ohio State has, the size up front? You're still going to be looking at a bit of a size discrepancy, and that's where I look at the offensive line, and I think, coming out of the Michigan game, Michigan did expose them a little bit. They were able to get some one-on-one matchups and win those. What did they do? What did Indiana learn from that game? And how are they going to perform better now that they've had a bye week, a week to sit on it, a week to be able to develop, to coach things up a little bit more to play against Ohio State? I think that's going to be a big-time matchup is who wins the trenches up front. Rourke, their quarterback. Like there's some lessons that he learned there as well in regards to it's a timing offense. When that timing is thrown off, and Ohio State definitely has the athletes to be able to throw that timing off, whether they're going to go press man coverage and be physical, or if and depending on the pressure, is he going to be able to step up? Is he going to be able to throw the ball, on that 5th step? You get to that 5th step in your drop, you take 1 step up and you deliver the ball. For most of the season, that's what Rourke has been able to do, and they've been able to just get the ball out of his hands. Now against Michigan, they weren't necessarily able to do that. They obviously overcame it. But what are the lessons that they learned in that Michigan game? How is that going to benefit them going into Ohio State? And I think that might be a better story in regards to how did they make adjustments coming out of Michigan to be ready for Ohio State? Because obviously Michigan was probably defensively the toughest opponent they played to this point, and getting ready for Ohio State.
Yeah, I think what Indiana's offense learned against Michigan's defense over the last 2 weeks will be a huge telltale sign. In terms of the offense that Indiana's defense is encountering, this is the best one they've seen, and we'll see how it all breaks down. Does Ohio State win? And if so, does Ohio State cover what right now, as we record, is a 13.5-point spread?
I do think Ohio State wins, but I don't think they cover that. I don't think enough credit is being given to Indiana's defensive front. One of the things I was most impressed about was how aggressive their front 7 played, how physically tough they were. And, it's sometimes it's hard to judge, because I say the defense may have gotten them ready to play Ohio State. I'm not sure Michigan's offense did, because of the way that the offensive line played. When you look at that Indiana front, they've got guys that are big, tough, physical. They're good athletes. They are good at being able to slant and shift right before the snap or at the snap. And I think that's going to give Ohio State some fits. But I think ultimately Ohio State adjusts. I think the athletes, I think the speed at the receiver position, because Ohio State's still loaded at the receiver position, ultimately is what Indiana can't match up with.
What I'm most fascinated about is how the committee analyzes the loser of this game, because that will go a long way. I think if Penn State wins out, they are at Minnesota. That's not a gimme by any stretch. That feels a lot like Oregon at Wisconsin last week of, Penn State's expected to win, but it's not going to be easy. PJ Fleck will have the Gophers ready to row the boat. But I do wonder how the loser of that game will be gauged, because then it's pretty much done for whoever loses in terms of Big Ten championship conversation.
Sure. I mean, if Ohio State wins, it most likely will face Oregon in the Big Ten championship game. And then we get a chance to see, okay, on a neutral field, who's the better team. Obviously, the last matchup was out in Eugene, and it was Ohio State. And we all know the stat earlier in the season. It was Ohio State traveling 3, time zones. Now it's going to be Oregon traveling 3 time zones, but it's not in Columbus. I don't know how that will all play itself out, because we've seen Oregon be able to do that. Obviously, they did it against Michigan. They've done it against a couple of other teams traveling across the country to be able to come away with wins. If Indiana wins, it might eliminate Ohio State from the college football playoffs. I don't know how the committee would gauge a 2-loss Ohio State, even though their 2 losses would be to the number 1 team in the country and the number 5 team in the country, versus what you're seeing in the SEC with a logjam of 7 or 6 or 7 2-loss teams. And then you go down the road even further in regards to, okay, if Indiana does win this game and they face Oregon, what does a loss in the Big Ten championship game mean to them? And how does it relate to, other programs, other teams that are in a situation where they're not playing a championship game? The ripple effect of some of these games is going to be very entertaining.
We don't know how the loser of that Ohio State-Indiana game will be gauged, because we need to know how the SEC cleans itself up. And we'll talk about that here in a bit. Few other teams to hit on. Washington with a win over UCLA, and Rutgers with a victory at Maryland earned bowl eligibility. The Huskers 5-1 to 5-5. They finished with Wisconsin at home and then at Iowa, trying to get to their first bowl game since 2016. I think we'll find out if Wisconsin indeed did put everything into that Oregon matchup, because Nebraska's flailing. And to me, if they don't win that game, I don't think they're going to Kinnick on a 5-game skid and getting to 6-6.
Probably not. I mean, but both of these teams, whether it's the Huskers or it's Wisconsin, I mean, they're both fighting for bowl eligibility at this point. And so both teams have the same thing on the line. But I think you're right. Like, how much did Wisconsin, is this going to be a game where losing to Oregon beats you twice? I don't know. We'll find out on Saturday.
All right, number 6 on our 7 from 77. Some quick hitters in the other power conferences. In the Southeastern Conference, Georgia winning at home over Tennessee, staying alive from all accounts in the SEC, the national conversation. Who knows where the SEC race is? I am not going into 5-team tiebreakers. Sorry,
no,
that's not happening. But both those teams are 8-2. Texas, an ugly win, but a win at Arkansas. And Florida upsets LSU. Brian Kelly, he certainly got a jab or two at him on the social media planets here the last few days. Playoff contenders this weekend. You kind of figure like everything could potentially still be clogged up heading into the final week of the regular season, with Texas hosting 4-6 Kentucky, Alabama at 5-5 Oklahoma. Boy, you feel like the Sooners might have some regrets about leaving the Big 12 with how this first year in the SEC's gone. Tennessee welcomes UTEP. Ole Miss is at Florida. That's the really intriguing one to me. Georgia gets UMass. Our condolences certainly to Don Brown, let go as the head coach of the Minutemen. And then Texas A&M at Auburn. That could be a sneaky, interesting one as well. Your thoughts on where the SEC stands? And again, I mean, it is the only thing we know is that if Texas and Texas A&M take care of business this week, they would go into the final week of the season facing each other. Winner goes to the SEC championship game, because no one else has less than 2 losses in the SEC than Texas and Texas A&M. So that would be a heck of a game. And we would know one thing. And then from there, good luck, folks.
I know. It's insane. Because right now you've got 6 teams in the SEC with either 2 or 1 loss. And obviously the only team with 1 loss is Texas. But I don't know what happens in the final weeks. It's going to be very entertaining. And I'll ask you this question, Brian, because we thought going into the 12-team format that there might not be as much importance on every single week as there was in the 4-team format. Now, it's true in regards to one loss might knock you out of that 4-team format, but it's only just shifted to 2-loss teams. You know, where are your 2 losses? When did they happen? Who were they against? And in the SEC, there might not be more of a spaghetti mix-up than the way that the schedule laid out versus the teams with 2 losses or less. Like because there aren't a lot of common opponents.
I just really think that there might be a scenario where literally 3 SEC teams have to go on the road in the first round of the playoffs. I don't know how you separate these resumes. This is as college basketball-esque as I thought we would even have a chance to see. Now, it could sort itself out, right? If Ole Miss loses at Florida, Rebels are done. If Texas A&M loses at Auburn, Aggies are done. You're not overcoming that. But I want to. There were a few instances in the 4-team playoff era where we saw, man, how in the world is the committee going to do this on like November, 12th or whatever?
Right.
And then it sorts itself out. So I don't want to make any broad proclamations, but if we do get A&M and Texas playing in the final week, and then there's legitimately like 4 teams tied for second place, yeah, then we can say this is chaos. So.
Oh yeah, I mean, and I think we're all rooting for chaos.
Yes, 100%. Big 12. We all knew that Kansas BYU line it had a stench to it.
Yeah.
Kansas was around a field goal underdog, 3-6 at 9-0 BYU, and Kansas does it. That's why they're the big buildings in Las Vegas. So
what
BYU,
do they know?
It's like, hey, if you really think you can win on that, good for you. That's tough. Arizona State and Colorado remain hot. Big one this week is BYU at Arizona State. BYU might go from being the Big 12's favorite to completely out of this thing, because you got the Cougars and the Buffs are 6-1. Sun Devils and Iowa State still hanging around. They bounce back with the win over Cincinnati. They're 5-2 in what, frankly, I don't know how this league gets more than one team.
It's a bizarro world. And I don't think they ultimately get more than one team, but who's that one representative going to be? Is it BYU? Is it Colorado? Like, who would have thought we would be talking about Colorado as Big 12 champs getting it? And here's the thing. It doesn't mean they have to get one of the first 4 seeds. It could be ultimately, I don't know, we'll talk more about the college football playoffs here in a minute, but it could ultimately Boise State, if they run the table, that could be one of the top 4 teams that gets the bye. And then Colorado is hosting as Big 12 champs somebody from the SEC.
Colorado is the example of the team that whose season may have legitimately been saved, and the interest in it been saved by the 12-team playoff. They got throttled by Nebraska week 2 after barely beating a good FCS program in North Dakota State. But now here they are with real chances. And, if you're a team, Colorado has the athletes and the stars to put up a fight in a quarterfinal game if they get a bye and face a team that they'll be an underdog to. Like, this is the example of keeping everybody in it for a longer period of time. Yes, we're going to have a few playoff duds, but I think Colorado's the team that's a really good example of what this playoff has done. ACC, SMU's one of those teams too. They beat Boston College. Clemson wins at Pitt in a thrilling game to stay in the hunt. Tigers are now done in the ACC play, so they're in wait-and-see mode because SMU is 6-0, Clemson 7-1, Miami is 5-1. Hurricanes host Wake Forest, SMU at Virginia, Clemson takes on the Citadel. Again, I don't think the ACC has a chance to get multiple bids either. The Miami undefeated run was the best chance. Now, if they lose a second game, I don't think they're getting that large.
No, they're not going to get an at-large. If they're a 2-loss team, there's no way that they get an at-large bid. I think the only chance for any 2-loss team to get into the college football playoffs from the ACC is to simply win their conference. And I mean, that's the only path anybody has really that they know they're going to be in. But it's going to be really curious between SMU, Clemson, and Miami. Well, which two of those three will face off? I know who I think is probably playing the best football right now of those three, and I think that's Clemson. But will they ultimately be left out if Miami wins out and SMU wins out?
Yeah, it's fascinating. And Clemson faces South Carolina. The Gamecocks playing good football. That's the rivalry matchup at the end of the season that does not impact the ACC race. But if Clemson loses that, and then, if Clemson loses that and then wins the ACC, that's where the Boise State conversation really comes in of them jumping into a bye. But we shall see. So along those lines, John, number 7, 5 auto bids, 7 at-larges. Who you got heading into another reveal a little bit after we record this?
Well, some of this is just kind of relying on chaos, and some of it is leaning on chaos because I really don't have any idea what's going to happen. I think Oregon is the Big Ten champ. I think Texas ultimately wins the SEC. And here's where it gets interesting. I'll give you Boise State. All right. So we got 3 of the 5.
In that order, or are you saying Boise's 5?
No. I'm just saying I'm giving you 5, and then I'm going to give you the 7 at large. I'm not bold enough to place anybody right now. I'm going to go with Clemson coming out of the ACC. I think there's chaos will ensue, whether it's Miami that gets a loss, SMU. I don't know where it comes from, but I think Clemson finds a way into that ACC championship game. And as I mentioned, I think they're playing the best football right now. They're maybe the most improved team in the ACC throughout the course of the season. And so I'm going to go with Clemson as the ACC champ. And then here's the wild card. I think chaos ensues in the Big 12, and Colorado ultimately wins the Big 12 and gets in. They've got some big-time playmakers who, in the most critical of times, have been able to make plays. And whether it's Travis Hunter on either side of the ball, it's Shador at the quarterback position who extends plays, throws prayers up that get answered. I don't know what it is, but there's just something unique about Colorado at this time of the year.
Colorado, the chaos has already happened. I think Colorado winning the Big 12, knowing what we know now, might be chalk. It wasn't a month ago.
No.
I'm with you.
Just can't wrap my head around that.
Yep.
So my 7 at large, and then I want to get yours as well. I'll just run through these because there's not a lot of change from last week. Notre Dame, and then out of the Big Ten, you got Ohio State, Indiana, Penn State, Alabama, Georgia, and Ole Miss out of the SEC.
So I don't think you had Ole Miss last week, did you? You had
Tennessee,
right?
That's the one new. And with their win, I just think that there's enough momentum, and I think the committee will view that as a big time win.
Yeah, I'm worried for the Rebels at Florida. Gators are playing all right. They beat LSU. Ole Miss is coming off the "we've arrived" game, the win over Georgia, all of that. The SEC is so week to week right now. I'll say Ole Miss doesn't get in. They're not going to lose to Mississippi State. That's a rivalry game, but I think Ole Miss has some troubles with the Gators. Maybe I'll look like an idiot this time next week, but
we'll see.
Yeah, I'll be interested who loses.
I don't know if anybody can really look like an idiot right now, because especially when you're talking about SEC matchups, it feels more like a coin flip depending on which team shows up on which day.
Fine, I'll take a stand. I think Georgia beats UMass this week.
You're so bold.
And on that note, our audio listeners get a conversation with Davis Warren, and our video viewers here on the Michigan Athletics YouTube stream at John Jansen 77 on X get the beautiful face of Jack Miller. Hello, Jack. What's going on, buddy?
Gentlemen, how are we doing on this rainy morning?
We're doing great.
I've been inside. I didn't even know it was raining.
So for those who have been loyal viewers throughout the year, obviously John has a little bit of a different setup there over at his 91.7 studios. There is some unique irony to the fact that due to some construction there in the studios, you got moved to a bright red studio.
Oh yeah. Yes. Bright red. I'm working on changing, and it will be critical next week that I have a different background than I do now. But we're working to overcome the odds.
Play through the elements.
That's right. Well, let's start with Jack, just your overall, we'll get into Michigan and the matchup with Northwestern and looking ahead to Ohio State, all of that. But since we were just talking about the playoff setup, how have you taken all of this chaos in? And do you think once we get to Championship Saturday and the true 12-team bracket versus just the rankings right now that are, and let's face it, now, the last few years when Michigan, they were featured very high in these November reveals, frankly, I didn't care. It just didn't matter because when you only had 4 teams, you had to keep winning. You almost certainly had to keep winning for you to have a shot. Now, I think these are very helpful data points, checkpoints for us to realize just exactly how this looks. How have you taken all of this in?
I think it makes the chaos pretty fun. It feels like nobody's ever really out of it. I mean, Georgia had to win last week to feel like they still had a shot at things. But you got this, you got this group of teams in the top 15 that are shuffling around right now trying to figure out. A lot's going to get determined in the next couple of weeks, obviously, with conference championships and some big games to end the season. But I think it makes it fun. And in years past, and we've talked about this before, but in years past where, a big loss could really set you back and you almost were trying to tread water and recover from that the whole season. Now that's not the case. Now you can afford to have 1 or 2 okay losses and still have a chance at, which I think that makes it exciting. It keeps teams in it for longer. It keeps the fan bases caring maybe for a little bit longer. And it certainly has changed the dynamic of what college football looks like at this point in the season, because to your point, you had to keep winning and you basically knew in the past who those teams were going to be. And right now there's still a lot to be determined.
And on the heels of you talking about 1 or 2 good or bad losses, and you're still in the mix, what do you think happens in Columbus this weekend between the Hoosiers and the Buckeyes? And if Indiana loses, it's going to be their first and only loss on their record. They're not going to be in the Big Ten championship game, but
right.
Are they still in the college football playoffs?
Well, like you were talking about, John, you're assuming that there's going to be chaos, and I think that there will be. Maybe is it enough for Indiana? I think then it comes down to some of the old stuff about style points, right? I mean, if they hang with Ohio State the entire game and look like they can compete with the number 2 team in the country for a while, and that's their only loss at the end of the whole thing, I mean, you're a little bit up in the air on what those other teams look like, but they've put together a pretty good season thus far, although not beating teams that maybe were in that elite caliber. And so if they do drop that, then you're left thinking, just like the old days of it was 4 teams and now it's going to be 12 of, who's last in. And that's a team that you probably have to consider that with. But I think it comes down to style points, really. I mean, if they battle with Ohio State and look like they can hang with them the whole game and look like they can play the part, yes. If they go out and it's a bad day for the Hoosiers and Ohio State runs away with it and it kind of solidifies what people are maybe considering, that Indiana's just still not quite there at that level, then maybe that 1 loss is enough to keep you out. Depending on what the other schools do, I guess we'll see.
Yeah, I remember, was it the first year of Michigan's 3 straight where Michigan State went to Columbus late in the year when they were contending and just got throttled, overwhelmed the entire game? That can't happen, or Indiana probably gets booted at 11-1 as long as the SEC stays somewhat orderly. Couple funny things. One, love this comment from the New Life. The red is for the Hoosiers this weekend. That is what the backdrop is for John.
Sure, we'll go with that.
Supporting IU there. Yeah. Good stuff there. The other thing I'll say, because John, you asked my thoughts on the playoff bracket. There is a chance, and it's not completely outlandish, where the 4 power conference champions win leagues that they were not in last year.
Oh, yeah.
Oregon, Texas, SMU, and Colorado.
Right.
We could legitimately have those 4 teams win leagues they just entered. And I don't think SMU, I think that would be the one thing I'd change. I still think Miami's going to find a way, because I don't know if Clemson is going to get it done.
What conference are they in again?
No, well, they mess up the protocol.
Which one are we talking about now?
The Big
Right.
East.
yes, exactly. Yeah. Wait a second. Wait, Pac-12. Wait, no, they're not in existence anymore. It's bizarro world.
Yeah. I mean,
it's created parity, right, wrong, or indifferent. It has been entertaining, particularly on a year where Michigan's not having the year that they should, to watch the chaos ensue versus, the typical programs run away with it at the end. And maybe you had, a team or 2 that were flirting with playoff towards the end of the season. Now it's all over the place. And I think if you're just a fan of college football and like to watch football and see people compete, that makes it fun because the amount of people that are now invested in doing that.
Yeah.
All right, so there is parity. Is it good? Is it good football though? I think that's the other question is the talent, because we know it's hard to find 32 good NFL teams. Now we're looking at the next level down of college talent, and we're looking at 20 teams that, or maybe 18 teams that could be in the mix. But is it good football?
And I think that might even trickle down from another factor. I mean, you could argue that with the NFL, besides the Lions right now, you could argue the same thing. And is that trickling into college with not practicing as hard, not practicing as physical, the skill development's there. But John, near and dear to our hearts, the line play at both levels hasn't been what it should be over the last couple of years, maybe. So I think there's a lot of factors going into that. And I think that's a fair point that it's not the level of football that it's been in the past. Now, as we get, to the end of November and into the playoffs, we'll see, right? Do certain teams come alive and and kind of stand out above the rest? But to this point, it's been hard to see that. Maybe part of it's been matchups, but I would agree with that it doesn't look the way it's looked in years past.
What I think is interesting is the fact that obviously a conference championship now still carries weight because if you're in one of the top four, you get a bye, and there is prestige in winning that. And I think I made the point last week or the week before. I believe that the most meaningful championship game in college football is the SEC, but I think the most meaningful conference championship is the Big Ten, and that still carries weight, even if it will be a first-time team in Oregon potentially winning it. What I think is fascinating is that there are so many more teams that we are talking about. Ole Miss would not have come up on this program the last, 4 weeks, other than them beating Georgia as an upset, if it weren't for the 12-team playoff. The team that I think has been least discussed of anybody, even though conference, like first place in the conference isn't nearly as important as it has been in the past, it's Notre Dame. No, what have people talked about Notre Dame other than the loss to NIU in the last 7 weeks? And they keep winning. But they're just, to me, we barely brought them up here.
Well, I mean, the last couple of years, go ahead, Jack. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, are those impressive wins? I mean, and losing to a team like NIU takes so much wind out of your sails. And they've, it's been a lot of, I think, okay teams. Maybe I'm missing one or two on the schedule, but they've crawled their way back to it. But I think, a loss like that just creates a mindset that, hey, they're not where they should be. But give them credit. They have kind of fought their way back into the conversation. But again, without the conference championship and, nobody's paying attention to them. That's fair. They're under the radar.
But if you look at their schedule and you say, okay, well, maybe they really haven't played anybody. They've got the one loss to Texas A&M. That was a top 20 matchup at the time. Compare that at the end of the season, if they win out, and if Indiana loses to Ohio State, Indiana will have lost to the number 2 team in the country, but they really haven't played anybody else. And you look at Notre Dame and you say, well, okay, maybe their schedule is marginally tougher. They did play a ranked Louisville team, and they took care of business. They played a ranked Navy team. They're going to play Army this week, who is also ranked. But when they played the lesser teams, and, it's hard to think of a brand like Florida State as a lesser team, but this year they certainly are. They've taken care of business like Indiana has. They beat Florida State 52-3. They beat a team like Stanford 49-7. All right. So when they were asked to play the schedule that they were given, they have taken care of business other than that one-off against Texas A&M.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting. So let's talk Michigan, Jack. Your takeaways from what the Wolverines did at Indiana. And the reality is, as soon as Michigan lost at Illinois, the whole focus was, hey, see what you can do against your rivals. Obviously, try to win as many games as you can, but Big Ten national conversation is over. So what'd you see from that matchup where Michigan certainly hung around in Bloomington, had a chance to win late, and how that can potentially help Michigan getting ready for obviously this weekend, but also the matchup in Columbus?
Yeah, I think as far as the Indiana game's concerned, there were moments in there, kind of like the entire season. There's moments and flashes in there that are really, really good. And then offensively, there's just not enough there to get it done and to win at a high level. And obviously, we know the defense played terrific in that second half. the offense just couldn't help. They couldn't play complementary football and find a way. It's honestly been the story of the season thus far. That in pockets at different times in the game, they're playing well. Different position groups at times in the game are playing well. They just really struggled to get into rhythm together and find a game that the offense and the defense performed at a high level. The weird part is coming off that Illinois game, Oregon, there were moments like that in that game that you could be really proud of the way that they were playing, and they almost were knocking on the door with a chance to really make it a ball game in the fourth quarter. Same thing with Indiana. They had their chances. They had their moments. They easily could have found a way to win that game. And so you don't like moral losses, so to speak, but there is something to be said for getting better each week. And a team that, its major goals besides beating rivals have been gone for the last month now. And yet they're still playing hard. And yet they still seem to be trying to get better as individuals and as a team. And for that, you're excited. And I think that signifies that the culture is still in a good place where guys are still playing for each other. They're still playing hard. They still care and want to do the right things. Hopefully after another bye week, some time to rest and recoup and get ready for 2 games that are very, very meaningful. You want to get to 6 wins. You want to get to bowl eligibility against Northwestern. And then we know what the Ohio State game means. And you got senior day coming up in the big house. Those guys are going to, it's the last time they'll have the opportunity to play there. And that in and of itself is plenty meaningful.
Davis Warren has played better in these 3 games than he did in the first 3 games. Yep. The offense has, even though you could say marginally, looked better at times under Davis Warren in these 3 games than they did really at any time earlier, depending on opponent. What do you think you need to see from Michigan against Northwestern with Davis Warren, with the receiving group, with the offensive line, to prepare with the context of Ohio State's looming on the next week?
Yeah, I don't know if it's coaches speak. Obviously, you're thinking about that Ohio State game, but in a way, you want to get the win against Northwestern to get the win against Northwestern, and whatever that's going to take and whatever that's going to require to get that done. Obviously, there's been moments where the running game is so in sync and Mullings is running downhill and Donovan gets to the edge and the offensive line's playing as one unit. It looks good. There's been moments, to your point, although marginal, that the passing game has looked better over the last several weeks, primarily because they've been able to take care of the ball. And I think that that's really where the difference has come. Is it hasn't been exceptional play on the offensive side for the entire season, as hasn't been. And we've talked about it during the broadcast before and after the game. You don't necessarily have to make the big plays all the time. You can't make the big negative plays all the time. And if you're willing to do that, you'll always be putting yourself in a better situation. They've been able to do that, and they've done it against better opponents, which is why it hasn't translated into wins, because it's still not good enough and you're playing better competition. Against a Northwestern team that you are more talented than, that you should go out and get a victory against, if you play your style of ball, that's good enough to go out there and get a win. And then you think about what it's going to take to beat Ohio State, which is, the same principles that always apply for Michigan. You got to start running the ball. You got to get that offensive line rolling as one unit. Mullings rolling downhill. You got to take shots when you can. They struggle to do that this season. They're going to have to against Ohio State to get a win. But this is, I think, the tenor of the conversation. This is, the prelim to that Ohio State game. And you just want to see people be in sync and just be rhythmic and not make mistakes that are going to put you backwards.
Yeah, that's an area. If Michigan is to go to Columbus and win, that offensive line has to have its best game of the year. The running game has to be like it was in September. Is that feasible to you guys?
Certainly feasible. That's why you play the game, right? I mean, and we know how these rivalry game goes. I mean, against Ohio State, against Michigan State, all bets are off. You can hang around no matter what the records say. So absolutely, it's feasible. It's going to be difficult, but it's feasible.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo that. You talk about, probable versus, likely versus unlikely. And
yeah, where are we at on the spectrum with that?
Yeah, we're all over the spectrum. And, whenever you take the field, anything is possible. And it is possible that, hey, everything clicks at the right moment for this Michigan offense. I don't know how likely that is, how much of it needs to click. And for Michigan, I honestly think you're going to have to get the best game that everybody has had this year in Columbus. And that's on both sides of the ball as well as in special teams. You're going to have to get everybody's single best game of the season in Columbus if you have a chance to win that game.
As a preview of
I do think that the the defense in particular has enough. The defense in particular has enough talent to keep that game in check. And if you get a turnover here, a big special teams play there, the offense is playing good enough, you can be in that game late in the fourth quarter and anything can happen. But to John's point, it's going to take a full complementary football game and everyone's best at every position.
I mean, here's the reality, and it's different. The game is different. Obviously, when you've lost 3 straight, like Ohio State has, they've been circling that game for a long time, and they have built the type of roster. They have had the type of NIL support that Michigan had last year, right? They are loaded. Now, it has not been as smooth. They have not taken care of business against some of the lesser teams on their schedule as smoothly as Michigan did last year. I mean, Nebraska gave them a heck of a fight. Nebraska's falling apart. Northwestern certainly hung around for a little while. Ohio State did not bludgeon them 31-7. I don't think totally tells the story there. So that defensive point to me, Jack, is so crucial, because if Michigan's defense can continue that upward trajectory and have its best game against Northwestern and then do the same against Ohio State, that gives you a chance, right? That gives you an opportunity. If you told me right now, hey, Michigan's defense has its best game and the offense doesn't turn the ball over, not saying that gets it done in Columbus, but I'd take that right now and then roll the dice and see what happens.
Yeah, you just got to limit big plays. Ohio State, what they've always been able to do is if you're in the game with them, they can just put up 14 or 21 points in a flash, right? And so if you can limit the big plays from them and just go toe-to-toe and wear them down over time, which has been the recipe the last several years, this is not an invincible Ohio State team by any means. We've seen more talented teams come out of there over the last several seasons. So you just try to beat them down, wear them down, and get to the fourth quarter with a chance to win. But by limiting those explosive plays, because that's how they're going to try to run away with it.
Young guys, you two are looking forward to seeing either a little bit or maybe more of here down the stretch, because now we're into the realm of 4 games. You can still keep your red shirt, and obviously Michigan, outside of Will Johnson, they're getting healthier. Certainly, they're not healthy, but they are getting a little bit more in terms of guys back or guys healthier after coming off injuries. Who are you looking at from a youth standpoint as we do? Yeah, you want to win in Columbus coming up here, but obviously from a national conversation, Michigan's gearing up for 25.
Well, I mean, I really think you got to look and say, okay, what is it that they can build upon for next year? And I think Mason Curtis in the secondary is certainly one of those guys. Dom Nichols up front defensively is a guy that's been able to get some run and played well. Jadon Hood is a guy that is getting more play, more opportunity at the linebacker position. And then offensively, there's a chance for some young offensive linemen to be able to get in there, get some reps with that starting group. And so those are some of the positions. Wide receivers, even though Kendrick Bell's not a freshman, he's a guy that has had more targets over the last few weeks, and they're really just looking to find out who is it that we can rely upon, that we think is at a certain level this year, but they're showing enough that we believe they're going to be a part of the future, that we can build around them with some complementary pieces, whether it's through the transfer portal or it's through recruiting.
Yeah, I'd echo that, particularly in the back end defensively. A lot of young guys run around in Will Johnson's absence that have showed moments. I think that's a group that's gotten better throughout the course of the year and has continued to improve, continue to become one unit. You see a lot of different names out there. And then the one guy I'd point to is go back to Evan Link, right? And the guy who's played a little bit this year, didn't play a little bit this year. And how does he respond to that? Is he a guy that, John, as you mentioned, maybe some of these younger guys get in over the next 2, hopefully 3 games? What does that look like for the future? Can you take your lumps now while you're a young guy trying to figure it out, trying to build into what it takes to become a Big Ten offensive lineman and become better and run with that into next year? Getting valuable reps as a younger guy this year didn't always work out at times. Okay, can you take that, build upon that, and be better for the future? And then complement that with some of the NIL and transfer portal guys that we're going to obviously have to go find this offseason.
Another guy that I know is probably likely to get some extra time in these next couple of games. We've seen him on kick return now that he's healthy. Jordan Marshall. Anybody that you talk to in that building can't say enough good things about the player that he is, the talent that he is, the leadership that he's shown even as a freshman. There's a lot of excitement about what Jordan Marshall can be. I mean, there's been coaches that have compared him to a Blake Corum in terms of his leadership, his presence, his ability. I think Jordan Marshall is going to be a guy that we need to keep an eye on in these last couple of games.
That's high praise.
High praise.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And it's, that is the belief of many. We shall see what happens. Wrapping things up here. Jack, we won't get your perspective on this stream next week, but as an Ohio native, what does that rivalry mean to you? And was it difficult for you when you played to not look ahead when you're prepping for the game before the game?
Yes, it was hard not to look ahead for me, being an Ohio guy. And that was probably the only game that you felt that way in. Because, and you're at this point in the year too, you're at, it's about to end. And so you're kind of figuring out what that looks like. As far as the game is concerned, it certainly means a lot. You circle that date on the calendar every year. And it can be, when you get victories, it can be the greatest 5 days throughout the course of the year. You got the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, you got Thanksgiving, you're with family, friends, and then hopefully you beat up on Ohio State, and it's awesome for 5 days. It can also go bad when I've been a part of games that we weren't able to find a way to win, and it can ruin what's a great week. But it's bragging rights for a year. It's that rivalry is as deep and as intense as any rivalry in all of sports, I'm convinced, what it means to people. And being from Toledo, where it's split about 50-50, it's always been a very emotional thing for me and my family. So yeah, it's fun, and it always kind of builds into this throughout the season, when it's going good, when it's going bad. But it doesn't matter, because when you strap up against Ohio State, all bets are off, and you're doing anything you can to get a win. I think everybody knows how special that game is and the privilege it is to play in it.
John, got anything else?
No, I'm going to save everything I have until next week.
Oh, I know. You got to give a locker room.
Just don't be in the red room at that point.
Yeah, no, trust me. There will be no.
Actually, you know what? I might want him to be in the red room, because that would spark it even more. There's no need for any added sparks when it comes to next week. That'll be a unique one. And I'll just say this: there are certain years and games where the locker room speech sometimes can be a little bit manufactured. This one will be all natural. And I will say that Brian may have to have the profane beep handy. Profane beep.
Yeah, whatever you call it. I don't know, the profanity beep.
Well, the live joke is the 7-second delay, but yeah, we do have. I fortunately do. I do listen to make sure. Back in the day, I was actually in the room with John when he did the locker room speech, and I was the only person there, and we avoided eye contact, and it was kind of awkward.
Yeah, it was a little as I'm in a full body sweat giving a pep talk.
He stops
by myself.
All right, yep, I'll see you later. Have a good day. Not running out there. In John's old office at Schembeckler, though, he was looking out on the field, so that did, I think, help a little bit. He could look out there versus just me kind of sitting there and going, yeah, I bowled in high school. This doesn't impact me.
Championships are all championships.
All right. Well, we look forward to Jack's insight coming up throughout the tailgate show on Saturday. John will hop on around 1:30 for Michigan and Northwestern. Jack, any final thoughts? Last words. Nice vest there you got on.
Thank you. Thank you for the comment. I was waiting for a comment on my outfit at some point, so I'm surprised we waited this long.
I did. What did I say? Did I say handsome or beautiful or something at the beginning? That was
beautiful face. I think it was.
Yeah.
No, I think the only comment I'd give is, excited for Saturday, excited for one last hurrah in the big house this season. Senior Day means a lot to those guys. A group that obviously hasn't had the year that they wanted to, but they're playing hard and they still care. And there's a lot of pride on the line, and they want to make sure that they go out with a bang and get this 6th win, so we know we're bowl eligible and go from there. So I'm super excited to get back in the big house on what looks to be probably another dreary November day, but it's great football weather. I'm excited for it.
Remember, there's only 6 home games next year, so cherish every opportunity you get at the big house. We were lucky enough for 8 this year, only 6 next season. So Can't wait for it. All right. Thanks to all those who tuned in. And, of course, catch the Wednesday edition of In the Trenches for Davis Warren. A great conversation John had with him. All right, everybody. Go Blue.
Go Blue.